Thank you for joining us. On the final day of a rare Beijing visit, the U.S. Secretary of State met China's top diplomat Wang Yi. Blinken earlier held more than 7.5-hour talks with the Chinese foreign minister. Tensions have risen sharply between the world's two largest economies in recent years. Here's a look at the complex relationship and the issues of friction. First, tensions over Taiwan. What we know right now is that Beijing claims Taiwan as part of its territory to be seized one day, even by force, if needed. Taiwan has lived for decades under constant threat of an invasion by China. Beijing claims Taiwan as part of its territory to be seized one day, even by force if required. However, many Taiwanese people consider their self-ruled island to be distinct, whether or not independence is ever officially declared. The United States says peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is crucial and has implored both Beijing and Taipei to maintain the status quo. Joe Biden has stated several times the United States would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked. White House officials have walked back on his comments, and officially Washington maintains it does not support Taiwanese independence. Next is the South China Sea. With defense outposts on artificial islands, China claims almost all of the South China Sea. The South China Sea is a key gateway for a large chunk of the world's merchant shipping. The sea contains rich fishing grounds and reportedly reserves of undiscovered oil and gas. The South China Sea, therefore, is a key economic and strategic subsection of the Indo-Pacific. Next, concerns over civil rights in Hong Kong, a semi-autonomous Chinese city. And this is what we know right now. After the 2019 anti-government protests, Xi Jinping imposed a sweeping national security law. The law restricts freedoms promised to Hong Kong. Next, China, or this is according to the Western allies, over the past few years, China has held over 1 million Uyghurs against their will. China has faced global flak for atrocities against the Uyghur population. France, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and the Netherlands have accused China of committing genocide. Uyghurs speak their own language and see themselves as culturally close to Central Asia. China has been accused of orchestrating the migration of ethnic majority to dilute the Uyghur population. Beijing has also been accused of banning religious practices in the region. Over the past few years, China has held 1 million Uyghurs against their will. Now, the U.S. is critical of China's unfair economic policies. Washington is moving to deny China's access to high-tech products and foreign investments involving security concerns. And finally, U.S.-China ties have also been roiled by espionage claims. In February, a Chinese balloon, which Beijing denies was a government spy vessel, spent a week flying over the U.S. and Canada before being shot down. I know I said finally, but we still have to talk about these issues. One alarming aspect of the sour ties has been Beijing's reluctance to have an open military-to-military dialogue with Washington, despite repeated U.S. attempts. Now, finally, on this stage, in May, Washington said a Chinese fighter jet carried out an unnecessarily aggressive maneuver near a U.S. military plane over the South China Sea. Footage released by the U.S. military showed a Chinese fighter jet crossing in front of the American aircraft, which could be seen shaking from the resulting turbulence. A few weeks later, the U.S. Navy said a Chinese warship nearly hit U.S. destroyer in the Taiwan Strait. Okay, let's talk about another issue now. The two sides have more recently looked again to keep tensions in check. Let's have a look at the past engagements between the United States and China. We begin with Bali, where Biden and President Xi Jinping met in November and pledged to keep tensions in check. This was in Bali in November last year. Biden's national security advisor Jake Sullivan and top Chinese diplomat Wang Yi held an extensive meeting in Geneva in May this year. Then, the Chinese Commerce Minister recently made a rare U.S. trip, still in May. Blinken's China visit could set the stage for talks between Xi and Biden at multilateral summits later in the year. So this is what has been happening that went to the lead up to, Biden's visit to Blinken's visit to China. Now, let's talk about this. Dr. Malcolm Davis is joining us at this hour on WION World is One. Let's talk about this and the impact that Blinken's visit will have in the future. Dr. Malcolm, good to see you and welcome to the broadcast. Now, the U.S. State Department called the talks candid, substantive, and constructive. Is this a sign of good things to come in the future, or is it too early to judge?
Oh, it's definitely too early to judge. Look, I think that what these talks are more about is restoring a regular dialogue, particularly military-to-military dialogue, rather than achieving breakthroughs on key issues. I think that there was a very good reason why the Americans emphasized quite candidly low expectations about these talks. The fact that they've happened, they've lasted 2 days, they've had a series of discussions. We're yet to see if Blinken gets to meet President Xi, but irrespective of whether he does or doesn't, I think what this does is potentially sets the basis for future discussions, greater engagement, but it doesn't resolve the key issues that are challenging the US-China relationship, which is China's strategic ambitions in the Indo-Pacific, the issue of Taiwan, and the issue of the South China Sea.
Dr. Malcolm, there is no concrete progress on disputes that include Taiwan, trade, human rights, and fentanyl, like I mentioned in that report earlier. Why is China playing hardball with these issues?
Well, essentially because it can. It has no real desire to resolve these issues because as far as China is concerned, the US is a declining power and China is a rising power. And from China's perspective, its time in the sun is coming and it wants to be the dominant actor in the Indo-Pacific. It wants to end US strategic primacy in the Indo-Pacific that includes not only East Asia and the Western Pacific, but also the Indian Ocean as well. And India has some serious disputes with China over its land border. So I think that, from China's perspective, there is a degree there of arrogance in terms of, well, we're rising, why should we give concessions to the Americans? The Chinese will pocket as many concessions as the Americans are prepared to give them, but they will give nothing in return.
Dr. Malcolm, you did mention this, that we are also expecting to see if at all the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, will meet President Xi Jinping. What would be the significance of that meeting going forward for both the United States and China, if at all it happens?
Look, if that happens, I think the main focus of that discussion would be establishing a basis for a visit by President Biden to Beijing to meet with President Xi in a state visit later this year, probably. That certainly is the discussion that's going within policy circles, that would be the next step. But I wouldn't expect any significant breakthroughs there. As I said, it really does come down to China's strategic ambitions, which are to dominate the Indo-Pacific region as essentially leading what they call a community of common destiny, to achieve the China dream, a rejuvenated China that is once again the dominant actor in the region, and to ensure that it controls Taiwan even against the wishes of the Taiwanese people. And I think that those key issues are all at the expense of US geostrategic interests. And the Chinese understand that, but they're not prepared to backtrack. They're not prepared to give ground on this because they feel they don't need to. So the Americans do have to stand firm. They do have to push back, and they do have to deter China from using force in places like the South China Sea and Taiwan. And part of that is engagement and dialogue, and this is what's happening now. Mm-hmm. Part of it is also military preparedness and readiness to respond to challenges.
Dr. Malcolm, finally, and I want your quick response to this. If the meeting does not happen, what is the message that China will try to be sending to the United States?
Well, if the meeting between Xi and Biden doesn't happen, or between Xi and Blinken doesn't happen, then it does put a damper on the whole thing. And I think that when you would see diplomatically things go back into cold storage and we'd return to very much to essentially a standoff. And I think that's where we'd end up.
All right. Dr. Malcolm Davis, thank you very much for talking to WION World is One today.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.